Hello, everyone. Since you've all kind of naturally fallen into a hush, I guess we'll get started. Welcome once again to the Whaling Museum for Food for Thought. My name is Corey Fabian Bornstein, and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator here at the NHA. And it's my pleasure to introduce this very special edition of Food for Thought with our very own Betsy Tyler and Jacob Horton. As always, I want to take a moment to thank you for supporting this free community program that is made possible in part by the MS Worthington Foundation and also receives support from Novation Media. And a small note on that score, Novation does a great job of filming these every week and uploading them to YouTube. So if you've missed any of the past ones or if you want to watch them again, you can just go to youtube.com/Nantucket history and they're all there. It's wonderful. So before we get started today, if you could take a moment and just turn off or otherwise silence your cell phone so it doesn't disrupt the presentation, that would be lovely. We had a few phone calls yesterday during Food for Thought, so please do silence your phone. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to remind everyone that tomorrow is the final day of our Sketching at Greater Light series that we've been doing with the Artists Association. It's your last chance for the spring. We're hoping to do it again in the autumn. But it's tomorrow morning from 10 to noon with an AAN instructor, MJ Levy-Dixon, and you really get to get up close and personal with these artifacts and do some sketching, get a little artistic. So if you're interested, tickets are available on our website, nha.org/tickets, or you can just grab me after the talk and I'd be happy to get you registered. So on that note, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Betsy and Jacob to you guys. Betsy Tyler is the NHA's inaugural Obed Macy Research Chair and serves as Director of the Research Library and editor of the NHA's biannual magazine, Historic Nantucket. Previous to her alliance with the NHA, she's worked as a freelance writer, researching and writing 36 house histories and neighborhood guides for the Nantucket Preservation Trust, and authoring a series of titles for the NHA, including Greater Light, A House History, Sometimes Think of Me, Notable Nantucket Women Through the Centuries, just a favorite of mine, and the Sconset Actors Colony, Broadway Offshore. She also heads up the oral history program for the NHA, as you'll hear more about today. Jacob, meanwhile, is a history researcher currently managing the new oral history projects through the NHA's oral history internship. During his time on Nantucket, he has conducted, transcribed, and cataloged local projects with first-generation immigrants, former NHA presidents, and longtime community residents. All of the NHA's oral history work is available at the Fair Street Research Library, and much of it is also available through NHA's online database, which they will tell you in detail how to access and how you can get involved. So please join me in welcoming Betsy and Jacob.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me okay? I've been told I have to hold this directly in front of my mouth, so I might forget. We're going to talk about oral history, and I'm sure everybody's heard the term oral history, and you think, what is it? Obviously has something to do with the spoken word and with stories, and that is, in general, what it's all about. But I'm going to read you the definition that comes from the Oral History Association of America. And they say that oral history is a field of study and a method of gathering, preserving, and interpreting the voices and memories of people, communities, and participants in past events. Oral history is both the oldest type of historical inquiry, predating the written word, and one of the most modern, initiated with tape recorders in the 1940s, and now using 21st century digital technologies. So, why do we collect oral history? Well, anybody who's writing about history really treasures a personal narrative that describes an event. And personal narratives can be letters or journals, or they can be oral histories. So we collect these stories for future historians, for biographers, students, whoever's interested, because we know that they are important primary sources for discussing history. They enrich the facts of history with reflection and opinion and a personal perspective. So, I mean, if you think about the way that you might have studied the Civil War when you were a child, the way I did, you were given list of battles and generals, and you knew the underlying causes and the casualties, and it all sounded horrible, but you didn't really have perhaps a personal reaction to it. But when somebody like Ken Burns made this wonderful documentary about the Civil War, and he told the stories that come from the personal experiences of people, their letters and their journals and their photographs. It becomes real and it becomes human. And so oral histories, being a kind of personal narrative, work like that. They give you the personal impact of history from one person's perspective. So that's why we collect them. We collect them for scholars to use. We collect them to enhance exhibitions. They provide a permanent record of life here on the island. And they give you the opportunity just to listen to voices from the past. So Jacob's going to share with you right now some information on the process of collecting oral histories, what's involved, and give you a little more in-depth idea about what oral history is all about. Because Jacob, I think this was not mentioned in the introduction, is a graduate of Columbia's master's program in oral history. It's the only program like that in the country. And he comes to us with a lot of expertise and a lot of great ideas. So, Jacob.
Thanks, Betsy. I want to illustrate a few core ideas about oral history before taking you into the process of what we do. Oral history and its relationship with macro history, for example, I think it's important to understand some of the distinctions. Keep in mind that in some societies, before literacy became a normal thing in the world, history is not a written record. It is a story. It is a chronicle passed down through speaking and listening. The griot I have pictured here is a role in some West African societies today, contemporary, still going on. It's the role of the griot to study and memorize stories of the past from her predecessor. This is an idea that comes up in oral history literature as a means to illustrate some of the core values of oral history. It reminds us of some of the more enduring ideas. So the griot relates the stories that she studies to the community. If there's questions about the community past, the community members consult the griot. She's the historian. So this idea reminds us that transmitting the past from person to person, from generation to generation, one of the most enduring qualities of that action is simply through speaking and listening. Now, if you accept that every person has their own interpretation, their own experiences of the past, their own story to tell, then conducting an oral history interview begins to look a little bit like consulting a griot. Now, the idea is also helpful in contrast. Like a macro historian, the griot is going to consolidate, reduce, in a sense, the historical narrative, the stories of the past to a single perspective, a single story. In contrast, the oral historian is going to go into the community and draw a variety of stories, a variety of narratives. And those narratives may overlap, they may contradict one another. In analysis, that's a separate process. But the premise, the fundamental premise of conducting oral history interviews is that each individual, any individual, their perspective, their take on the past is potentially significant. So I'm going to walk you through the collection process. There's roughly 5 steps in oral history collection. The first, you need to conceive of an idea, identify your community, and then you need to identify the members of that community that are going to represent it. So you're going to need to coordinate, you're going to need to find people willing to share, people able to share. That's your first step, that's outreach. Now the second step, probably the most obvious step, the one that you're all familiar with, would be the interview. Probably the shortest step. Once the interview is secured, we need to make it accessible and available, useful to people. Most people will not actually take the time to sit and listen to a full-length audio recording or even a video recording of an interview, but they will sometimes take the time to read a transcript. They can skim, they can read faster than they can listen or watch, and so we take transcription to be a fairly serious step in the process because it really makes the interview accessible to a lot more people and a little easier to use. Now, after you have a transcribed interview, then you can begin to produce products that are based on the interviews, sort of like the excerpts that we're going to share with you today, or perhaps an article or a book. You're going to cite the interview as a source. You need the transcript to make that easier. So that's the four-step products, although really probably that's the lasting long-term step. We will call the final step, which is the preservation of the materials and ensuring their accessibility in perpetuity. That's really the final step. You have to make sure that the conceit is that in the future, people will want to access this material and use it for academic purposes or personal purposes. I mean, maybe you have an ancestor who's had an oral history done. You want to know more about them. You want to hear their voice. And the way that we preserve the materials in perpetuity is called archiving. So that's the final step. I'm going a little more in depth on the oral history interview. Really, you need... No problem. 3 conditions. You need a quiet space, you need some time, and you need to accept the premise that this is going to be open questioning. So it's in contrast to highlight open questioning. What I mean by that is to imagine, I think it's easy for us to imagine a journalist who's going to arrive at an interview with an agenda and is going to pose pointed questions in order to draw out specific information. So in that example, the journalist is really driving the narrative, pushing the interview in a particular direction for a particular purpose. This may also be true in an oral history interview, but the default of an oral history setting is to cede narrative control to the speaker. So oral histories rely on open questioning to encourage elaboration and to really encourage the speaker to develop their own interpretation fully of their account of the past. So to set that tone, most interviews begin sort of most often like this.
So can you tell me a little bit about where you're from? Where'd you grow up?
You want to tell us a little bit about your childhood on Nantucket?
Why don't we start with when you were born and where you were born?
Can you take me back to when and where you were born, the environment that you grew up in, the people that raised you?
So that's a pretty wide opener. So it allows the person to really set the tone, set a foundation, and in general indicate to the narrator that this is going to be a space where they can tell the story fully. So, where are we? Yeah, the transcript, thank you. So ideally, we'd like all the interviews to be transcribed. They look something like this, ideally. So each speaker is clearly indicated, and hopefully we have marked a passage of time throughout the interview. So if at any point you want to listen to the speaker and hear their voice for whatever reason, if you think you're going to gain more meaning from it, or you want to get to know their personality, or maybe you just want to hear their accent, our transcripts ideally are coded so that you can reference the audio. So, for example, in this transcript at 16 minutes, you could just jump in and hear.
And Bud Bonneke came in and he says, "Well, Phil," he says, "if you stay right here, what would you do?" I says, I'd tear this building down and build a new one. Yeah, he said, "What would it be like?" Well, I drew it right out on a fish wrapping paper. He says, "Yeah, I'll take that up to my architect," he says, "see what he can do with it." He didn't change a thing. he just drew it up exact, and that's what happened. That's how it came out.
So we also include reference data if you were going to cite the interview, collection, page number, etc. So Betsy's going to talk more about the NHA's collection and introduce some of our audio clips.
Okay, where are we? The NHA has been actively collecting oral histories for decades. Our earliest recording is from 1934, believe it or not, and we're going to listen to that one in a minute. These recordings, most of them were on cassette tapes, but in 2009, that entire collection of over 400 oral histories was digitized. So we have computer files, WAV files, and MP3 files you can listen to from your home computer of every one of our oral histories, which is pretty fantastic. We'll show you later how to get to those through our website. But first, we wanted to share some clips from some of our oral histories with you. And this first one is really pretty special. It was part of a project called the New England Linguistic Atlas, where people traveled all over New England recording speech patterns and dialects. And it was more, the people who were doing this project were interested in human speech. We're interested in the content because they came here and they interviewed some pretty cool people. The first of the people they interviewed, James Henry Gibbs, was born in 1850. He went whaling in 1868 when he was 18 years old, and he talked about that in 1934 when he was 84 years old. And so Jacob has pulled a clip of James Henry Gibbs singing a whale song, and part of what you can do with oral history, the fun part, is you can take clips like Jacob has done, and you can make a little production piece. He's added photographs from our image collection. Some of them that you'll see he's done some subtitles for if you can't understand them very well. So you can make a nice little video out of oral histories, and this is James Henry Gibbs.
Run out your whale song. You got me now. I'll say, we want the tune. If you know the tune, we want the tune. We want it with the tune. As I was a-going up Orange Street, I met Captain Edward Perry. Said he, young man, come join our crew and sail in the good ship Henry. Faddle-daddle-ding-dong-I-do, faddle-daddle-ding-dong-day. You will surely make your fortune, as sure as you are alive. For instead of charging you 90%, they'll charge you. Instead of charging you 50%, they'll charge you 95. Faddle-daddle-ding-dong-I-do, faddle-daddle-ding-dong-day. From Nantucket walk with a shovel, with a gallant ship in motion, and around Cape Horn we swiftly bound into the Pacific Ocean.
Oh, that's pretty remarkable that we have that. It's a great addition to our collection. We do have a couple other interviews from that linguistic atlas, so you can go online and listen to those as well. This interview with Vito Capizzo is from the 1980s. One of Vito's students interviewed him, and I'm sure probably everybody in this room knows Vito. He was the coach of the Nantucket high school football team forever and won many, many trophies, tournaments, and he was the athletic director at the high school. Had a real interest in children and sports. And in this interview, he talks a little bit about his own immigration story, about coming to the United States when he was a little boy and didn't speak English, and how sports helped him adapt to a new world.
When did you first come to the U.S.?
Well, I think probably I should divide the question into two parts. One of the reasons why we came was because my dad at that time felt that the opportunity of getting an education in Italy are very slim. The difficult time was leaving all my relatives in the old country and coming over here. We spent 11 days on a boat, my mother and I, on a big ocean liner. And unfortunately, she spent all 11 days in infirmary. She was sick as a dog, as you would say. And I was loose on that boat, not speaking a word of English. I had a ball, but I got in a few difficulties myself. Well, having an English barrier, coming to a foreign country, it's very difficult to get to know kids. And I found out, even in Italy, I was always interested in sports and playing with kids, and that was, I guess, my goal in life. I think if it wasn't for athletics, I probably would never would attend any college or any education. People were asking me, why do I stay here when I've had good offers to go away. I love the island. People in Nantucket have been excellent to me, and I think my ball players have been more than fair with me, and this is what carries us on. But I've been blessed with some good kids. We have Joe Perry this year, Johnny Bartlett. All these kids give you 110%, yourself included. And this is what makes high school coaching fun, when you see a bunch of kids who go different ways, get on a football field and perform like a machine. And that is more gratifying than having all the money in the world.
Some people like Vito don't need much prompting. They can just talk forever, and that's what we love to get. It's a great story. This next clip is Madeline Gardner Perry, who was town clerk here at Nantucket for a while. She has a story about a childhood experience during World War II here on Nantucket, and it's one I had not heard before. It's a pretty interesting little episode that she reveals here.
And then in World War II, one morning, my dad called me. Now I'm about maybe 19. And he said, Madeline, did you see anything unusual last night when you were out? And I said, no. Why? And he said, well, come downstairs. So I went down, and right across the street, like at the entrance to Prospect Hill Cemetery, and right across the street is the way to Cisco. There were the Army stationed there with their bayonets.
Really?
And they were also at Surfside and all the places leading out of town. Somebody the night before had gone along Surfside Road and painted swastikas all over the road. So I think people thought the Germans had come. And, this was before the days of TV, and you really didn't know any different. You found out what you did from the papers and the radio. The papers would give you something a week later that happened a week ago. And anyway, one of the young men who worked for him worked for my father, and a friend of his had taken the truck that night and gone out to Surfside Road and painted those swastikas on the road.
Uh-oh, so they found out who it was. Did they get in trouble?
I don't think they ever did find out who it was.
Oh, really?
I knew, but I don't think the authorities ever found out who it was.
So mysteries are revealed sometimes in these oral histories. Eileen McGrath, who I'm sure all of you know, has given us several oral history interviews and talked about her life and her childhood, and she has an amazing memory. She's astounding. She calls herself the sage of Burnt Swamp, and she is the sage of the island, I think. So when I first was sort of given charge of the oral history program here, and I didn't know how to use our equipment, and I hadn't done an oral history interview, so I called Eileen and said, will you be my guinea pig? I want to come interview you, and I know you've been interviewed before. So I'm going to bring a map of Main Street, of all the shops and businesses on Main Street from 1949. Or it might have been earlier. She grew up in the 30s here on Nantucket. And the map I had showed every building, and it gave the name of the business. And I said, I'd love for you to walk up one side of the street and down the other with me, virtually here, and just tell me what you remember about, you know, the people who ran these businesses and the shopkeepers. And of course, she knew everybody. And she had a story about we had to do 2 interviews, up one side and down the other. But this is a little clip where she is talking about Hollands Market.
The next door to it would be 37 Main, and that was the one that was very important in my family, was Mr. Hollands Market.
Right.
That's right. And he was, as you know, my Uncle Byron's stepfather, and another one that looked like President Taft, very well padded with a walrus mustache and a booming voice. And he had a little bookkeeper that stayed in a separate little container. And she evidently had a romance with the gawk that was down at R.G. Coffin's. I don't know how, it never went anywhere. You know the one I told you was R.G. Coffin's assistant?
Right.
That seems to be the one she had a romantic interest in. Of course, we kids were not supposed to know anything, so we had to just pick it up as we went along. But she was a lovely person. Anyway, Holland had, again, good produce, and he sold chickens and eggs, and Sunshine Farm was owned by people named Burgess, and they raised chickens. And they sold those chickens and the eggs at that market.
You really should go online and listen to the rest of this one, because she has a story, like I said, about everybody who was on Main Street in that era. And the final clip that I'm going to talk to you about today is this interview with Win Handman. Win Handman is huge in the New York theater world. He was one of the founders, or is one of the founders, of the American Place Theater. He was an acting coach and a playwright sponsor. He's had a lot of influence. And unbeknownst to me and a lot of people, he's been summering on Nantucket for 30 or 40 years. He spent many summers in Lesser Light, the house right behind Greater Light on Howard Street. He entertained people there that you would not believe. But he was very low-key, and he loved Nantucket because it was such a nice community in the summer. It was very family-oriented. And so in this clip, he talks about Sundays down at the gazebo and the music that was performed there and the families that gathered, and he has this nice little anecdote. And he sings,
No,
too.
we really liked Nantucket, and it was very much like a traditional American small town. It had a butcher shop on Main Street, had a 5 and 10 called Robinson's, a hardware store called Hardee's, and it had a gazebo, which on Sundays the band from the high school played, and the teacher there was Georgie. Her name was called Georgie Girl, and they were very fond of playing the song because it was a popular movie of the time. Hey there, Georgie Girl, la da 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 dee da 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 dum. Now, my wife Barbara and I, we had traveled. We were in Italy in 1953. We went to a lot of towns like Perugia and Assisi. And in those towns, there were gatherings at the plazas where you had every generation, and the kids were playing and old people were there, and it was very moving. This was the way it was in Nantucket on Sundays at the gazebo, which had the band, everyone, and loved watching Georgie Girl. She was kind of stout. You saw her back. And every generation was there. The feeling was wonderful.
Win Handman was another great person to interview because he had prepared for this, and the first question I asked, he just took off and talked for an hour with no direction needed. He was wonderful. We're going to now, Jacob's going to share and talk to you about some of our recent oral history work, but I want to give you a little background on what we've been doing. We got a grant from Mass Humanities in 2013 to record the stories of recent immigrants to the island, because as you all know, our demographics changed radically in the past 20 years, and we had the opportunity here to get the stories of first-generation immigrants to Nantucket from lots of different countries in the world. And there's some pretty fascinating stories. So the grant allowed us to interview people, and it also allowed us some funding to create a digital exhibit of these interviews with immigrant Nantucketers who have made their home here. So we started off with some volunteers who helped us out. Nancy Newhouse, who many of you know, is a local professional oral historian. She's done lots of interviews and published a number of books. She got us started by interviewing people she knew from Brazil, Mexico, El Salvador, the Philippines, and Lithuania. And Justine Paradise, who grew up here, who lives here now, who's a radio journalist. She's very interested in storytelling and recording people. She volunteered her time, and she did a couple interviews. And then Jacob came on board as our first ever oral history intern for his 10-week internship last fall. He is now in week 26 of his 10-week internship. It's been extended through funding from the Judy Family Foundation and from our own funds here at the NHA. We don't want him to leave. So we had promised in our grant proposal that we would do 8 or 10 interviews, and we ended up collecting 15 interviews, and we collected photographs along with those interviews. So we have family photos of a lot of the people that we talked to. And then working with Novation Media, we created a digital exhibit that features 9 of these people talking about their immigration story. And it's part of a larger show that we have here, a larger exhibition called New Arrivals, New Voices. And it's up in the Nantucket Corner. It opened in November for our Diversity Festival, and it's going to be up for a year. And the exhibition talks about the history of diversity on the island, from those first English settlers who came here to live among the Wampanoags, on through the generations. And then it ends with this digital exhibit of recent immigrants to the island. So Jacob's going to tell you more about his work with that New Arrivals, New Voices project, and he has a clip from one of the interviews that he will share with you there.
Thanks, Betsy. Pardon me, I'm still getting over a bout of illness here. Working on New Voices was really a great experience for me. I loved it. I feel like we spend a lot of our time trying to control the direction of our lives, things coming in and out, our environment, to manage things, to reduce change. But what's really, when a person decides to move from one nation to another, they really invite a radical change. And this is part of what makes those stories really fascinating to me. Migration across culture and language, it changes our grasp on our fundamentals. I mean, the basics of communication, basics of diet, relationships, our role in society, these things come into flux. And the process yields really often a unique perspective. In one place, you're an insider looking out. In another place, you're an outsider looking in. And in the course of the transition, you become a little of both, a little of neither one. And it really grants a unique perspective. And I think it's that perspective that makes the stories so engaging for me. I think it's also that perspective that allows a person to undertake the extraordinary feat of radically changing their lives, and that's always an amazing story. So I'm going to share one clip that did not, we excerpted 2-minute clips from 9 of our oral history interviews and handed them over to Novation Media for production into the New Arrivals exhibit that's up in the Nantucket corner right now. I hope you have a chance to take a look at it this year if you haven't seen it already. So this is one that didn't make it into the exhibit. This is an interview that I did with Geeta Nakarma. Geeta was recruited recruited for a work opportunity from her aunt's hotel in Kathmandu, Nepal. And one of the first things that Geeta told me before we started the interview was that trying to communicate the differences between the two worlds that she vacillates between Nepal and Nantucket. She said when she moves in between those worlds, it's like she's being flipped upside down. It's so radically different that it's very hard for her to express it. So I said, that's fine. Let's just walk through and tell me the sequence of events. And in this clip, she talks about arriving on Nantucket, her first months on Nantucket, and the challenges she faced.
And they show us to the room. We went to the room, and we both just cry whole night because we wasn't thinking how it is. So we cry, and at night when the wind blow, the tree was making a sound like zzz, and it looks like somebody is there. We both cry a lot. And next morning, and my friend Donna like, okay, maybe you guys are hungry, so let's go to the Stop and Shop and get something. We walked to the Stop and Shop, and she bought us some phone card so we could call home. So we don't want to lose the time because there's only one phone at the Stop and Shop, like a public phone. I don't know if they have it now, but those times. So we both call. We call at home. We say, don't want to stay. We want to come back. We're not going to stay here. So we call the lady, Genji Barman, too. We don't want to stay here. We want to go home. Send us to the Nepal. She's like, okay, take it easy. It's not going to be like, just calm down. Like, you have to see it's a far away. Maybe we are so tired. Maybe we are missing family. It was couple months. It's very hard to learn a job. Like we never know. We know pizza, but we don't know the pizza have that much of toppings. So, and we don't know how to call those stuff even because where we from, we love to cook at home, eat our food. We don't go out that much. So, first couple months it's very hard. I couldn't understand nothing. Totally different. We just don't know what we are doing over here. We just look at it here and there. Everybody look at us like a funny face, like where we're from, right? It's like, it was a tough time.
So, thank you, Geeta. Betsy's going to tell you now about how to access. One of the remarkable things about the NHA archive and library is that they have made all of, as Betsy pointed out, they've made all of their audio available online as soon as it's legally possible to do so. And in the cases where transcription is available, that's also there. So you can access both at any time, which is really useful for anyone who wants to use oral histories or is just interested in exploring oral histories. And Betsy's going to take you through how to do that now.
Yeah, but first I want to thank Jacob for taking that photograph of the telephone at the Stop and Shop, which we will add to our image archive, and also of the old Stop and Shop, because people don't generally photograph the Stop and Shop, so we're happy to have those photos. Thank you, Jacob. Okay, so if you want to get into our oral history collection from your own computer at home, you can do that. You go to our website, nha.org, and you will see on the left-hand column that you can search collections. So just click on that, and that will take you to a screen that lists all the collections that you can search, and you will probably get sidetracked and you'll start looking at pictures of houses on your street and people you know. But you can go down to the books and audiovisual materials collection, click on that, and there are a couple ways to get to the oral history collection. If you want to just browse the entire collection, you'll see a link on the right there that says Browse Our Oral Histories. And just click on that and they'll all come up. You can also do a keyword search. You can put in Eileen McGrath, or you can put in Win Handman's name, or you can put in a subject like scalloping or Main Street Fete, or whatever it is that you're interested in, and it will bring up those recordings for you to listen to. Or another way you can do it is go down to the bottom of the search screen where it says type of material, and click on the menu there and just click on oral histories. It will give you the same results that you get if you go to browse our collection. So many ways to get there. So once you've put in your search information, you can pull up a record like this that says, that gives you complete description of that oral history interview. Gives you the authors, meaning the interviewer and the interviewee, the date, the length of the interview, a synopsis, a location number, and then down at the very bottom, you'll see a button that you can click for the audio file, and that's where you'll get the whole recording, all usually about 60 to 90 minutes worth of a recording. And then for our most recent oral histories and some of our older ones, we have complete transcripts. So you can, at the bottom, click on transcript and get the PDF of the transcript, and you can listen to the audio while you read the transcript, or you can read the transcript and find the section that you want to listen to and go to the audio and look it up that way. So we're trying to make these as easily accessible as we can, because we hope you'll all enjoy them. There's some great information and great stories out there, and we are delighted that we have all of these to share with you and with anybody in the world who has a computer. So to end, I would just invite any of you who would like to do an oral history interview or know somebody that you think would be a great candidate, just to come up and let me know, and we'll try to get to them when we can. Thank you. Oh, question. We do have those, yes.
Yeah, if you have any questions, I'll just run over at the microphone so everybody can hear the question. So just throw up a hand.
How much of a video component is there to your interviewing?
Well,
if any.
How many videos?
Actual video component to the interview.
Well, we have a separate collection of video, which are more, we have a lot of home movies. We don't have that many interviews that are actually done in video. Most of those are audio. But we do have on our YouTube channel a lot of NHA videos are there. They're videos of the Tony Sarg Sea Monster, and they're videos of people coming to the island in the 30s and 40s. There's some great visuals out there that you can look at too.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but it seems to me that it would be interesting to some people, sometimes when you're listening, to also see the interview.
Well, you have to do a little work there, but you could go to our image database to see if there are photographs of the people, like Jacob pulled those and added them to the audio presentation that he made, but you would have to sort of toggle between the two.
I don't want to belabor this, but I'm talking about actually videoing while you're interviewing.
Right.
You're talking about a video interview,
A video
right?
interview.
As opposed to an audio interview?
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Yeah, those are great, but they do require a lot of resources, and as well as a lot more setup in the interview itself. So for ease and to trim cost, we rely on audio interviews primarily. But given the opportunity, given the resources, we'd love to do video interviews.
Yeah, video interviews take up a lot of space on our server, on our computer. They're huge files. That's one reason. What we can do and what we've talked about doing is when we interview somebody in an audio interview, if there's a certain part of that that's like this really excellent story that might relate to an exhibit we want to do, we could go back to the person and say, hey, could you tell us that again on camera? And then we'll have a short clip that we can use for other purposes.
Jacob, I never had heard of a degree in oral history that Betsy introduced you with, and I'm curious about how you became interested in a degree in oral history.
Thank you. I became interested in oral history originally through traditional macro history work. That's what I did my undergraduate work in at UCLA. And then when I was there, I began working on a unique project where we were attempting to recreate an historical event in real time through a variety of media sources. It was a protest, and we happened to have a pool of resources. We had photos, we had mainstream media footage, we had independent media footage, and we were trying to recreate the event through all of these narratives. So we had also had the police footage. So we wanted you to be as an observer, as a user of this product, we wanted you to come in and select a path. Okay, I want to follow the independent media through this event. I want to follow a protester through this event. I want to follow a policeman through this event. And it was a really exciting project, but I just found that the tools of traditional history were a little limited in working with this. So I was looking for new ways to engage historical research. And at first I looked into anthropology. So I was really quite interested in anthropology for a while, and actually our professors at Columbia are anthropologists, so a couple of them. And so through my research, I came to the oral history program. And, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, reading their material, and I was unsure, but I decided to take the plunge. And it's really changed my way of thinking about history, about research, and about how we can learn more about our world. It's a very flexible form of research.
Sorry. CNN, NPR, has something they call StoryCorps, and I don't know whether it's once a week, I can't remember, but I catch it once in a while. And after they've done the interview, they have a tagline saying that these interviews are put into the Library of Congress, I believe. Are you, or this, where, I don't remember where, but do we have our oral histories preserved that way, and maybe they should be?
So we worked with the StoryCorps people at Columbia for a little bit, and one of the core ideas of StoryCorps is that it's people who know each other interviewing each other, or one person's the interviewer, one person's the narrator. So it's a little different, it's a little more personal, it's a little more conversational than traditional oral history work. It's a great idea, and we actually are working with that idea a little bit here. We're developing, we've a few people in the community who are interested in interviewing people they know personally, and Betsy really does that to some degree. But it's a little bit more social, a little bit less research, but we're experimenting with ideas like that. It's a great idea.
And any oral history, to be accessible, needs to be archived somewhere. So StoryCorps archiving theirs with the Library of Congress. We're archiving ours here. They're both accessible the same way.
I'm just curious about one little detail that was mentioned. Where was the gazebo located that was referred to?
It's the same gazebo that's down on Straight Wharf. It just has a different function today than it did then. But that's where it is.
What kind of mic equipment do you use?
We use the little Sony digital recorder. I don't know the exact the exact model, but it's a digital recorder. It's very small. It has built-in microphones. It's a fabulous little instrument. And Jacob came to us with he brought his own equipment. So
I use lavalier XLR microphones. So they pin right to the shirt. They're a little guy like this. They're very, Very, very nice mics.
Hours it takes to process one of these?
Well, it's usually an extended process because it's interactive. You know, you've got to set up with people, uh, you know, coordinate with their schedule, and then oftentimes after I'm finished with the transcript, people will have expressed during the interview that they'd like to see it before anything happens with it. So lots of times I'll send people the transcript to look over before we publish it and archive it. So it does get protracted, but if you boiled it down, it's probably somewhere between 15 and 20 hours of work to put a 90-minute oral history interview into an accessible format.
Have you considered going to the island home or the homestead or someplace and interviewing those people? They have some fantastic stories.
I'm sure they do, and we do need to do that. Thank you.
I wonder how you deal with interviewees who aren't quite as fluent at narrative as these people that you gave us samples from. I remember once trying with my stepmother to do an interview about her past, and it was totally frustrating because she wanted to sound like a history textbook, and she became very self-conscious, and then when she didn't feel that she sounded important or literate enough or whatever the word is, she kind of just stopped. How do you deal with difficult interviewees?
Well, your ultimate question is a big question, but your example is a really good one. It's a really common thing, and that's why I try to make clear the distinction between sort of macro textbook history and oral history. So in order to encourage people to speak, in an interview setting, I'll just make allowances for whatever is bothering them. If they tell me, you know, I'm not really comfortable speaking with that, I say, that's fine. Let's not speak about that. But how about you tell me this other thing? Why don't you tell me that story? So one avenue is just to ask people, you know, disarm their fears. You know, I don't know enough about that to speak about it. That's okay. I don't need you to know. I don't need you to be an expert. I need you to tell me. I want you to tell me what you thought about it, and as far as your understanding. I mean, you know, you're not an expert on the subject, but it affected your life. It impacted you. How did that happen? And once you get people to really refocus their perspective to, you know, it's them looking out, them talking about how they understand the world, that's really all we're looking for anyways. And so it's just a matter of allowing people, in my opinion, to reposition themselves so they feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and opinions.
Yeah.
I usually don't edit interviews at all because it's really time consuming. But I'm also pretty comfortable with unedited interviews because I've done a lot of them. There are bumps in all interviews, so it's okay for me to put it out there with a few warts. And also, we always tell people, as a matter of course, if you're really uncomfortable with something that happens in this interview, this is another good disarming point. If you're really uncomfortable with anything that we're saying, we can edit it out later. You know, we have that capability. I don't have to. I'm not going to necessarily put this whole thing in there. Anything we want to cut out, we can. But we'll do it later. Right now, let's just talk.
Yeah, that's what we did when I was interviewing Eileen, and she told me some really good stories about people, and then she said, "You got to cut that out." And I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "Absolutely." So we did. And another thing that we do that seems to work well is to tell people, if we're getting a sort of a life story interview, think about your life as a movie, and think of the important scenes in that movie, and then I want to describe it. You know, what did it look like? You know, or describe a particular day. You know, so to get them to start to talk freely and maybe not to be constrained by trying to remember facts or, you know, that kind of information. And that seems to work pretty well.
Okay, let's do one or two more. Joanne?
if you did a video component at the same time when you were interviewing, don't you think that would inhibit the speakers a bit?
Sometimes it does, and that's one reason an audio interview is a much more intimate thing. You put the recorder down, you don't really notice it, and you just talk, or you let somebody talk. But if you've got, a camera pointing at you and maybe you need to adjust the lighting, it becomes a different situation.
It's much more of a production.
Mindful of how time-consuming this is, and there's the two of you up there, and that there's so many people that would make great prospective interviewees. Do you have plans to grow the program or to expand it, or how would that happen?
Well, that would happen with funding and staff, like everything. So, yeah, we hope to. That's our plan. So we will, use interns and volunteers and work as we can.
Yeah.
And we've gotten some great support lately, which is encouraging. We've talked about that.
Right,
It's a great idea. Yeah.
And if people are interested in volunteering with this, what should they do? Should they get in touch with you guys directly?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, please.
Well, on that hopeful note, thank you guys so much. And thank you all
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Thanks.